And now we must discuss different types of connotations. The connotation of degree of intensity. The connotation of degree of intensity can be traced in such groups of synonyms as to surprise, to astonish, to amaze, to astound, to satisfy, to please, to content, to gratify, to delight, to exalt, to shout, to yell, to bellow, to roar, to like, to admire, to love, to adore, to worship. So why is it called the connotation of degree of intensity? Because each word in the synonymic group is more intensive than the previous one. For example, to astonish is more intensive than to surprise. To amaze is more intensive than to astonish. To astound has the highest degree of intensity. To please is more intensive than to satisfy. To content is more intensive than to please. To gratify is more intensive than to content. And to exalt has the highest degree of intensity, and so on. And please pay attention to a very important fact that some words have two or even more connotative components in their semantic structures. In this list, the synonymic groups headed by to satisfy and to like contain words which can be differentiated not only by the connotation of intensity, but by other types which will be described later. So in the group of synonyms, to stare, to glare, to gaze, to glance, to peep, to peer, all the synonyms except to glance denote a lasting act of looking at somebody or something, whereas to glance describes a brief, passing look. These synonyms may be said to have a connotation of duration in their semantic structure. So other examples are to flash, which is brief, to blaze, lasting, to shudder, brief, to shiver, lasting, to say, brief, and to speak and talk, lasting. All the synonyms have other connotations besides that of duration. The synonyms to stare, to glare, to gaze are differentiated from the other words of the group by emotive connotations, and from each other by the nature of the emotion they imply. In the group alone, single, lonely, solitary, the adjective lonely also has an emotive connotation. She was alone implies simply the absence of company, and she was lonely stresses the feeling of melancholy and desolation resulting from being alone. In the group to tremble, to shiver, to shudder, to shake, the verb to shudder is frequently associated with the emotion of fear, horror, or disgust. For example, to shudder with horror, and therefore can be said to have an emotive connotation in addition to the two others. And please pay attention to a very important fact that one should be warned against confusing words with emotive connotations and words with emotive denotative meanings. For example, to love, to admire, to adore, to worship, angry, furious, enraged, fear, terror, horror. In the latter, emotion is expressed by the leading semantic component, whereas in the former it is an accompanying characteristic. And now let us deal with the evaluative connotation. The evaluative connotation conveys the speaker's attitude towards the referent, labeling it as good or bad. So in the group well-known, famous, notorious, celebrated, the adjective notorious bears a negative evaluative connotation and celebrated a positive one. So we usually say a notorious murderer, a notorious robber, a notorious swindler, a notorious coward, a notorious lady killer, a notorious flirt, but a celebrated scholar, celebrated artist, celebrated singer, and so on. In the group to produce, to create, to manufacture, to fabricate, the verb to create characterizes the process as inspired and noble, and to manufacture means to produce in a mechanical way without inspiration or originality. So to create can be said to have a positive evaluative connotation, and to manufacture a negative one. The verbs to sparkle and to glitter are close synonyms, yet it would be interesting to compare the following sets of examples. For example, his eyes or her eyes sparkled with amusement, with good humor, high spirits, happiness. Positive emotions, yes. And his eyes glittered with anger, or glittered with rage, hatred, malice, etc. So negative emotions. The combinability of both verbs shows that, at least when they are used to describe the expression of human eyes, they have both emotive and evaluative connotations, and also one further characteristic which will be described later. Now, the causative connotation. The causative connotation can be illustrated by the examples to sparkle and to glitter given above. So one's eyes sparkle with positive emotions, yes, as we have already mentioned, and glitter with negative emotions. However, this connotation of to sparkle and to glitter seems to appear only in the modal eyes plus sparkle or glitter. So the causative connotation is also typical of the verbs to shiver and to shudder, in whose semantic structures the cause of the act or process of trembling is encoded. To shiver with cold, from a chill, because of the frost, and to shudder with fear, horror, etc. To blush and to redden represent similar cases. People mostly blush from modesty, shame, or embarrassment, but usually redden from anger or indignation. Emotive connotation can easily be traced in both these verbs. And now let us deal with connotation of manner. The connotation of manner can be singled out in some groups of verbal synonyms. The verbs to stroll, to stride, to trot, to pace, to swagger, to stagger, to stumble, all denote ways and types of walking, encoding in their semantic structures the lengths of pace, tempo, gait, purposefulness, or lack of purpose. The verbs to peep and to peer also have this connotation in their semantic structures. So to peep means to look at somebody or something furtively, by stealth. To peer, to look at somebody or something with difficulty or strain. The verbs to like, to admire, to love, to adore, to worship, as has been already mentioned, are differentiated not only by connotation of manner. So each of them describes a feeling of a different type, and not only of different intensity. The verbs to peep and to peer are differentiated by connotations of duration and manner, but there is some other curious peculiarity in their semantic structures. And now let us consider their typical contexts. One peeps at somebody or something through a hole, crack, or opening, from behind a screen, a half-closed door, a newspaper, a curtain, etc. It seems as if a whole set of scenery were built within the word's meaning. Of course, it is not quite so, because the set of scenery is actually built in the context. But as with all regular contexts, it is intimately reflected in the word semantic structure, and we shall call this the connotation of attending circumstances. This connotation is also characteristic of to peer. One peers at somebody or something in darkness, through the fog, through dimmed glasses or windows, from a great distance. A short-sighted person may also peer at things. So in the semantic structure of to peer, are encoded circumstances preventing one from seeing clearly. The synonyms pretty, handsome, beautiful have been mentioned as the ones which are more or less interchangeable, yet each of them describes a special type of human beauty. Beautiful is mostly associated with classical features and a perfect figure, handsome with a tall stature, a certain robustness and fine proportions, pretty with small delicate features and a fresh complexion. This connotation may be defined as a connotation of attendant features. And finally, let us deal with stylistic connotations. Stylistic connotations stand somewhat apart for two reasons. Firstly, some scholars do not regard the word's stylistic characteristic as a connotative component of its semantic structure. Secondly, stylistic connotations are subject to further classification, namely colloquial, slang, dialect, learned, poetic, archaic, and so on. So here we're dealing with stylistically marked words. For example, girl and lassie, snack and bite, and snap, and refreshment, and so on.